Hi, welcome to another recipe session of. Today we have a special treat because we have one of our resident dietitians showing us how to do something really special. So Marguerite, what today?
Today we're going to make low protein crumpets, and to do that we're going to use the low protein mix.
Could you just take us through in detail exactly what you're going to be using here?
Yes, absolutely. We are using 300 grams of the low protein mix.
And that in sort of like old terms is
that's approximately 12 ounces.
Right, okay.
Yeah. And in the low protein mix, in the box, there's actually a sachet of yeast included that you can mix into the mixture. We're going to use some salt, bicarbonate of soda, a teaspoon of each. Yep. 250 ml of tepid water. And
so can we just get that out of the tap, or does it need to be boiled or anything first?
Well, what I've done is I've actually boiled some water and I've let it cool down. Okay. But you can actually just use hot water from the tap, as long as it's not too warm. Lukewarm would do actually, and a whole carton of the low protein milk as well.
Do we have to use this low protein milk, or can we use something else?
There are other low protein milks available on the market, so you can use different milks if you want to. Whatever is available. The recipe has actually been tested with the low protein milk. Okay. So for the purposes of this recipe, we'll be using that.
Right.
And then for frying, we'll be using some vegetable oil. And then for serving, you can use anything like honey or maple syrup, or any other kind of fruit syrup or jams.
So does it have to be sweet, or could you use savoury things as well?
Oh, you can use savoury things as well if you wanted to, but probably for the purposes of this, right, we'll be using sweet things. Okay, so I've mixed in here 300 grams of the low protein mix, and I'll be adding the yeast.
What else do we need to add?
We'll be adding a teaspoon of salt.
Mm-hmm. If you don't have one of these gadgets, what could you use? Just a normal
Yeah, you
teaspoon?
can use a normal household teaspoon. That should do the job as well. And then a teaspoon of bicarbonate of soda. Just make sure that you flatten down the teaspoon.
And these you can get from any supermarket, can't you?
You can. Any supermarket, absolutely. Yep. And then we'll be adding in the 250 ml of tepid water. And also the 200 ml or the whole carton of the low protein PKU milk drink. And then you just need to make sure that it's mixed really well.
Mm-hmm. You don't need a blender or anything. You can do it all by hand.
You can do it all by hand. If you do, for those people who prefer to use blenders, you can absolutely use a blender. It's probably a little bit quicker actually using a blender, but doing it by hand works absolutely fine. So you just need to make sure that you mix it really well. I'm going to need to do a lot more mixing.
Do you want me to do anything while you're preparing for the next phase? Or?
Yes, I can. If I can ask you,
okay.
It just needs to be mixing it really well. Once this is mixed, what we'll do is we'll leave it to stand for an hour so the mixture can actually prove a bit and the yeast can actually start to work. And that will increase, obviously, the rising of the crumpets once we bake it in the oven. In the pan.
So that's quite important, really, letting it to stand.
That's right.
What happens if you don't?
Well, if you don't let it stand, it won't rise, and it'll be a really flat crumpet. So right, what you want is a crumpet that will rise in the pan when you fry it.
So that's a top tip.
So now it's really nice and smooth, and we can let that stand for an hour. Right, so after approximately 1 hour, you can see that this has risen really nicely, and it's proved now perfectly to actually be baked, fried in the pan. So you can see that all the really nice air bubbles are going in there. Right.
So the batter's raised really well here, isn't it?
It has, yes, perfectly actually.
What do we need to do now?
A lot of air bubbles. Well, we're going to put a little bit of vegetable oil into the pan. Really just enough to grease your pan really well. So, and you don't want the pan to be too hot.
Okay.
The reason for that is you just want it to slowly fry, and while it's frying, it's actually cooking it straight through. If you fry it too quickly, you'll find that the outside is nicely cooked, but it'll be raw on the inside.
Right.
Okay. And what we're going to do now is just take sort of tablespoonful.
So the best thing to do is have 2 tablespoons.
Yes, absolutely. And then you just form it in the pan. And I'll probably do in this size pan about 3.
So do we have to worry about it looking round? Or?
No, it probably won't go around because it's quite a sort of a strong batter as such. It's not a runny batter, so it won't go round, but it'll form its own kind of shape.
It just looks homemade now, doesn't it?
It does, yes, absolutely. Just while that's sort of slowly frying, I can show you just one of the ones that I've made earlier. You can see actually that it's really got nice little air bubbles all the way through.
So even though it's low protein, it does look like a real crumpet, doesn't
it? Absolutely, and it's risen really well.
Really good texture.
So yeah, and it's nice and soft, and then obviously the oil makes it really nice and juicy in a way. Yeah. Okay, so we'll just need to keep an eye on these. Obviously, probably not a good idea to walk away from it because otherwise they might cook too much on the one side. So you need to sort of
down low.
Yeah, you need to just keep your heat kind of low. Oops, that is too just kind of merging, and just flip that one over, and then you just keep cooking that really sort of on a low heat. The lower the heat, the better probably, because it just allows enough time for it to rise. As you can see, it's rising sort of slightly in the pan, and to cook thoroughly all throughout the batter.
With the batter, can you freeze it or keep it at all, or do you have to use it as soon as it's? You'll have to
use all of the batter really, because you can't, obviously you can't retain that air distribution in there when you freeze that. But what you can do is you can cook them, and once they thoroughly cooked, you can obviously freeze the crumpets itself, and then keep it in the freezer and defrost it whenever you want some more crumpets in the morning for breakfast.
Well, you could keep it for a couple of days in the bread bin, or?
Yes, probably no more than a couple of days, because it'll become quite solid.
And then how would you heat it? You could either eat it cold or just put it in a toaster and eat it that way?
It's best to do it in a toaster, because then you'll get the outside crispiness, of course.
Because it's just too gooey if it's cold, isn't it?
That's right, yeah. And just keep turning it around, just so that you don't burn it on the outside, and just nicely kind of cook it all the way through.
So again, that's really simple to do, and it's just something different.
Well, it's an incredibly simple thing, and it makes a really kind of nice special breakfast.
Yep.
I mean, you can do all sorts of things. Like I said before, you can add fruit syrups onto it, maple syrup, honey, and we're actually going to use some honey today, and also jam.
But as you said earlier on, it doesn't have to be sweet. It could be savoury, can't it?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
So it could be a tea or an evening snack.
That's right. Or you could even have it when you're making a vegetable stew. You can have this as a kind of a dumpling on the side. So yeah, it can be used as a savoury as well, because the batter itself is not sweet. Okay, I think these are ready, so we'll load them onto the plate there.
So you just put it on some paper towels just to absorb the little bit of oil that's left, is it?
The residual oil, yes, absolutely. These come out a little bit bigger. Right, we'll just put a couple of crumpets on the plate here. What I'll do, I'm going to poke it a little bit with a fork, because what it does is it'll really nicely absorb the honey when we put the honey on it. And then you can just put as much or as little as you want of honey all over it, and it'll nicely absorb the honey.